Given the chaotic nature of the 2024 election season, many are expecting volatility in the financial markets. Due to this, we've gotten a lot of questions from clients asking what they should do with their portfolios. Here are our answers, including a bonus question about defined outcome investments. It's important that you know what these are. Dan, thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Mike. Happy to be here. I think it's my second time on the show, so delighted to be here and honored to have been invited back.
No, you got rave reviews the first time, so we're very happy to have you back. So let's get right to it. We've gotten questions from clients regarding what to do with their investments in this volatile 2024 election year. I'm just going to throw out the questions to you one by one.
Sounds good.
Question: should I sell all of my stock investments and go to cash?
I think the short answer, Mike, is no. And it will be no in the majority of circumstances, but it can make sense to have cash in your portfolio for things like short-term needs and in the case of an emergency fund, but otherwise it doesn't make sense. And inflation has been a hot topic over the last few years, and inflation, I think, is something that we all feel when we go to the grocery store or when we fill up our cars at the gas station, for example, but I think it's behind the scenes from an investment perspective. It doesn't show up on our statements. And in fact, we've got a great slide that illustrates the impact of inflation and how it can erode one's purchasing power. So, Mike, this slide shows the purchasing power of $100,000 over time. We can see how quickly, or in some cases not so quickly, it gets eroded. For example, if we assume a 3% annual rate of inflation, you can see how over 25 years, the purchasing power of $100,000 is cut in half. It becomes roughly $47,000 and change. With a higher rate of inflation, like 5%, it gets eroded all the way down to less than $30,000. So the impact of inflation, although we don't see it on our statements, is very real.
Question: what if instead of selling one's stocks and staying in cash, I just go to cash for now and then get back into the markets when things calm down or I feel more comfortable?
Mike, if you've got that figured out, I'd love to know your secret. In practice, it's just not practical or not even really possible. And we've got a slide that illustrates the impact of missing certain days in the market. Let's take a look at that, please. I'd like to quickly highlight this slide, which illustrates the last 20 years of investment performance as defined by the S&P 500. If you invested $100,000 at the beginning of the period and remained invested throughout, that would have grown to over $635,000. But if you missed only the 5 best days over the last 20 years, instead of having over $600,000, you'd only have about $400,000. Think about that for a second. There have been about 5,000 trading days over the last 20 years, and this is the impact of just missing 5 days. The results are more dramatic for missing more of those best days. And lastly, to make matters worse for market timers, the worst days in the financial markets often immediately precede or follow the best days in the financial markets, making it even more difficult to implement this strategy successfully.
Question: I'm worried about volatility in the markets, and since you don't recommend going all to cash, what are some things that I should consider?
Great question, Mike. I think that there are a number of things that you can consider. Let's touch on 3, though. I think the first is potentially reevaluating one's emergency fund. So in a period of market volatility, sometimes investors like to bolster their emergency fund and have a little bit more cash on hand so that there's peace of mind and they can better ride out the volatility in the financial markets. Another approach to take is to shift a portion of your fixed income portfolio into investments that are more predictable. Things that we like right now in the current market are high quality individual municipal bonds and also individual treasuries. I think in both cases, these are high quality investments that provide some level of predictability, often greater than other types of fixed income. And then the last point that I think is worth discussing today is adjusting one's equity allocation, and specifically reducing one's equity allocation. And I think rather than selling everything and going into cash like we've talked about, one can reduce equity exposure modestly and thoughtfully to not disrupt portfolio returns. It is worth noting, though, generally speaking, when you reduce equity exposure in a portfolio, that leads to lower returns and ultimately a lower portfolio value over time. So there's no free lunch and something important to consider.
Question. What about getting more aggressive with my investments or buying more stocks in industries that we think will do well if Biden or Trump gets elected?
Mike, that's a great question, one we've been getting an awful lot from clients lately with the election on the horizon. It's another one of these tactics that I think sounds great in theory. I think the problem is unfortunately, we don't know who's going to win the election. And even if we did, we don't know how certain sectors or stocks or the financial markets in general will react to that news. So I think a better approach is focusing on one's long-term investment objectives, sticking to an allocation, and at times you can target certain opportunities to increase return or conversely target opportunities to decrease risk. But really we don't know the outcome of the election or how the financial markets will react. And in fact, the last couple of administrations we've seen results that are counterintuitive to what many experts would suggest. So again, I think it's best to stick with one's long-term investment strategy and taking opportunities at the periphery.
Question. If there's no one great strategy for investing during an election year with expected high volatility, what should I do?
Mike, I think it goes back to focusing on one's long-term financial plan and also paying close attention to things we can control. And there are lots of things that we can control, and they're all components of, I think, that well-constructed financial plan. But two that we'll touch on today are tax planning and estate planning. And in both cases, actually, there's expected to be a sunset of the current laws. Effectively, at the end of 2025, really on January 1st of 2026, the current tax laws and also the current estate tax laws will revert back to what they were prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 that went into effect in 2018. So being aware of these changes, knowing that they're likely to happen at the end of 2025, and planning accordingly, I think these are some things that we can really focus on and that are in our control. And I think that's the best approach.
Question. Due to the current volatility in the markets, Altfest is using defined outcome investments for part of clients' portfolios. What are defined outcome investments, and why does Altfest now find them useful?
Defined outcome investments, Mike, are those that set parameters around expected outcomes. Said differently, they provide, I like to think of them as guardrails. They provide guardrails around upside and downside investment outcomes. So typically what happens in a defined outcome investment is an investor is looking for downside protection, and in order to get that downside protection, they're forced to give up some upside potential. So there's more nuances that I think are beyond the scope of today's conversation, but importantly, they are really good tools, in our opinion, to manage risk in periods of volatility.
Okay, key points. What does Altfest recommend clients do regarding their investments and personal finances in 2024?
Mike, I think those are great takeaways, and we've put together a few concise bullet points for you all. Let's go to that slide, please. Stick with a well-designed portfolio that's tailor-made to you. It's okay to sprinkle in opportunistic investments to manage risk or capture certain opportunities as long as it's consistent with your goals and your portfolio design, and also that you understand what you're buying. I would say also focus on what you can control to optimize your finances and preserve and grow your nest egg. And then lastly, have a plan and revisit it regularly. And when I say have a plan, I think importantly it should be a written plan. And of course it can be electronic, but it really should exist somewhere, not just in your head. When it exists somewhere, it's easier to revisit, and it makes us all more organized, accountable, and appropriately focused.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to discuss the information in today's video, receive a complimentary review of your investment portfolio or a retirement readiness analysis, or discuss other personal financial planning areas with an Altfest professional at no obligation, please call my colleague Jesse Freeling at 212-796-8732 or email Jesse at his email address, which is in the description of today's video. If you like today's video, please click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to receive notifications each time we release a new one. If you have topics you'd like us to cover, like or dislike certain things that we're doing, or have any other feedback, let us know in the comments section below, as we'd really like to use it to improve the channel. Thank you for watching today's video, and I look forward to being with you in the next one. Until then, be well, and remember to always be optimizing your finances, or let us help you with it if you'd like.